appreciate everybody getting on. I'm Dan Montgomery, I'm president of the IFT for another month and a half or so. And this is the first, so thanks for coming on. This is the first of our webinar series that we're just starting on a bunch of important topics. The webinar series is for you folks who are leaders, who are not only, say, elected leaders in the IFT, but also just activists. Sometimes you might not hold, an elected officer position in your local, but you've identified yourself as an activist, willing to take action, to show up at rallies, to write letters, or send emails, or make phone calls to your legislators at the state or the federal level, or other things. So, and that's really key to what we're trying to do in our union. So, you getting on this webinar is an activist thing to do, and we really appreciate it. So, I used to read this book to my kids, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Some of you may have read that to your children. And that's what I call this bill. Trump calls it, the Big Beautiful Bill, I think. I call it the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Bill. And in any case, it's law now, and it has far-reaching consequences for all of us. Um, and between being constituting the biggest transfer of wealth, I think the biggest single transfer of wealth in this country from working people to the ultra rich was his tax cuts in 2017, which is over $1 trillion in that transfer. Those cuts were going to expire, and to renew them, which he did, and made them worse, he's added another $2 or $3 trillion to the federal deficit, I believe. So anyway, we're talking about a bill that constitutes the biggest transfer of wealth from working people to the super rich ever. Um, you've heard the cuts to Medicaid, to the ACA eligibility, to SNAP, that's food relief for people, food assistance. All these things dig into or make life much harder for the people that we teach, the kids we teach, the families that we serve. In addition, there's, a really bad federal voucher scheme for the first time that we'll talk about. There's, in higher education, the list goes on. Everything from Perkins grants and loan repayment restructuring, which makes it worse for people. The costs, fewer, less financial aid. So the impact in higher ed is going to be really bad. So anyway, all of this we think it's important to give you a briefing on, and also to localize it, to talk about what's the difference, or what difference can this make in Illinois, and do we expect it to make, and will it make? So we're going to be on the call here for about an hour. We've got two fantastic folks from the AFT, our colleagues, Sarah Cohen and Peggy Shorey, who work in legislation issues and research issues at the AFT. They're terrific. They're going to talk to us about the impact in Illinois. Brian Johnson, our political director of the IFT, is going to talk a little bit more about here, what's going on here, and we have time for questions. So I'm sure you're familiar with these sort of webinar formats in the past on Zoom. If you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A. If you go to the bottom bar there, there's a Q&A, and you go in there. We don't have the chat open because this is kind of unwieldy with a lot of people. But when you have a question, put it in the Q&A, and we'll get to questions toward the end. So as I said, this is the first of this webinar series. We're looking at doing them in an ongoing basis. So hopefully this will be useful to you, and you'll spread the good word to your friends and colleagues. But revenue is a big one we want to tackle. Immigration, AI, likely maybe more on the vouchers. So there are going to be a whole set of things that we want to deal with. But we're glad you're here. So let me, with that, oh, and we are being recorded, just so you know, this is being recorded, and we will post this available for folks who weren't able to join us to watch later. So, you folks who are on this call have identified yourselves as activists, trying to go deeper, being willing to engage in the things that impact our members and the people we serve, our public. So we want to unpack this awful bill, and let's get to it right now with Peggy Shorey, who's from the AFT State Ledge office. Hi, Peggy. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Dan? Thank
I'm
you.
I'm good. Are you in DC right now?
Not at the moment,
Okay,
but
all
we're
right.
in and out. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I know you guys have to often go all over. Well, thank you for getting on. We appreciate the time, and let me just turn it over to you to begin to walk through the impacts of this bill for us.
Okay, great. Thank you. And hello, everyone, and to all of the IFT team. I'm going to start on the state end of things, and then Sarah will pick up on the federal side. Uh, so, just a quick note about the sort of budget landscape of where we are, even predating this bill going through. So, we know before we got to 2025, many states were coming into very challenging state budget years. Either there were in some states tax cuts coming into effect, or some of the prior federal assistance phasing out, or just based on what the revenue numbers were in the state. So many states were already in a difficult spot, and then we add this federal bill. I very much like the horrible, no good, everything big ugly bill. That's a great way to. I have to go get that book again. I haven't read it in a minute, but that's a really good way to frame it. I So there's two things that are sort of slamming states and state budgets. One is very real cuts, right? Very real money that's being lost. And the second thing is chaos, right? We have heard from legislators all over the country and affiliates all over the country. People are confused. They're like, what's in the what bill? Which one? Was that a press release or an EO? Or what's real? What's not real? And just in general, across the political spectrum, chaos and confusion is not usually good for state budget work, right? Legislators like to feel like they can count on things, they know what's coming. And so sometimes we see states will come into like kind of a little bit more of a contraction mode, right? Because they're just not clear on it. In a typical year, there might be three special sessions over the summer and fall, maybe five, something like, or some little interim sessions. By the time we hit May and June this year, 24 states said they were probably going to go into special session. And then as things have unfolded federally, we're still continuing to hear, we're almost at the end of August, and we're still continuing to hear from states, we might go in, we might not go in. People are trying to assess strategically, is it good or bad? Like, do they need to be in there right now versus dealing with some things in January? So just wanted to share that kind of landscape that in different ways, many states across the country are facing versions of that. I One other thing that I'll note, sort of big picture, before diving in a little bit more, is you've probably heard, there's a lot of variables of when things actually take effect in the bill. Of some things go in 26, some things don't take effect till after midterms. Uh, that's content we need to know. We want to know, for what budget year it hits, et cetera. We need to know that. But for organizing purposes, for activism purposes, it does not serve us to say this is a 27, 28, whatever year problem, right? We know that one of the things that's really important is we are creating the urgency right now, which you all at IFT do really, really well, is the urgency of the work that's happening, that's got to be fought for. That funding needs to be there. And we don't want to wait till whatever year something legally takes effect before, and we know from experience, if we do that, they won't blame the current White House or the current legislate, right? They'll just, whoever's in office at the point it comes through, that's who they're going to tag with it. So we know some of the things that Dan referenced, right? There's Medicaid cuts, work requirements starting, um, states having to pick up additional share on SNAP. So it's both cuts and an increase in what states need to cover. So particularly for states like Illinois, that's almost kind of the double whammy, right? If you're losing federal funds, you have that cut. And then because you believe in how important that work is, states are trying to pick up how to cover those extra costs of whether it's healthcare, food security, different pieces like that. Uh, the other piece I'll underscore that Dan also mentioned is who benefits from this, right? And we know right? You already know before I say it, you know the answer is it's not all of us. It's not the people you serve. It's not your students and their families. 70% of the cuts benefit the richest Americans in the country. So, and if you look in, just to give a couple examples, in Illinois, the average tax change, the richest 1%, so people who earn almost $1 million or more and above, they're going to save like $43,000. If you're just a little bit under being a millionaire, you might save $18,000, right? So those are the folks that are getting big chunks of money. If you are the lowest income, like say 28,000 or less, you might save $90. But if you know you're losing access to Medicaid, you're losing potentially SNAP benefits, things along those lines. We all know how tenuous life is in those even higher income than that, but still, at the low end of the spectrum, people will be in the hole before they even get going. So, and I know you all in Illinois have done phenomenal work of fighting for everyone. Um, there are a couple other pieces, just in terms of the risk of people losing health care. In Illinois, some it doesn't all roll in the first year, but there's about 384,000 people in Illinois that would be at risk of losing their health care. And you look at particularly under Medicaid expansion and people at risk of losing, based on federal changes around what's allowed around Medicaid expansion, either having rising costs, increased hardship, or just risk of losing it. That's about 714,000 in Illinois. So we know the effects of this are phenomenal. A lot of states are just on the state budget officers end are really still combing through to figure out exactly what's the state impact of things. We've been in a lot of contact with Brian and your team. There's a number of different state data charts if there's things that you need to support your work on it. I would just say one thing, sort of in closing, before turning it back to you, is thinking about what all of our role is. We will get great insight, advice, understanding from folks like Sarah, and Dan and Brian and everyone. At the end of the day, though, you do not have to be a perfect expert in a specific federal bill or an executive order. What you know right now is the most important, most valuable thing you can bring to a state budget fight. And that's your story, right? Of how, the teachers in your school, or whether it's healthcare or it's higher ed, public employees, et cetera. Uh, we want legislators to remember your names, your families, the impact of all of this. So we don't, at the end of the day, we don't want them to be thinking about a math problem. We want them to be thinking about a people problem. And that's something really powerful that you all bring to this. So thank you, Dan, and I will turn it back to you. Whatever way we can support you all, let us know.
Thanks, Peggy. Really appreciate that. So, and to your last point there, we're gonna at the end of the call, we'll show people a way to share their stories with us, and we want to. I'll mention it now, but we'll put it up again in a few minutes. But you can think about the stories, as Peggy put it, the people problem. I love the way you frame that. It's not numbers; it's a people problem, right? You all are experiencing now or about to experience, or if you've heard from your university or your district administrators or whatever, like cuts that may happen or the impacts that may happen, and we want to hear those stories. We need to share them out loudly. So you can always email us at info@ift-aft.org. We'll put that up in a few minutes too. But think about that. And if it's not you, if you yourself are thinking like, I don't know, but I have a great colleague who's in this program, or they teach, or they work in this division, and they're really getting slammed. They share that with them too. So anyway, all right, let me go now to Sarah from GR in Government Relations at the AFT. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Hi, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being on. All right, give us the good news.
Well, I can't say it's going to be good news, Dan, but let me share some additional information about what is in the big ugly bill, the big horrible, terrible, no good, very bad bill. And I'm going to share my screen to go through this. So just give me one
Sure.
moment
And
here.
while you're doing that, I'll just remind folks, we will take questions, and you can just type them in now if they occur to you, and we'll get to them in a bit. But the way to do a question is at the bottom, the banner at the bottom of your Zoom, there's a Q&A icon. You click on that and you can type your question. And we'll start getting to some questions in a bit. So, all right, Sarah, take it away.
Great. Well, hopefully everyone can see my screen. And I'll just go ahead and speak for a few minutes, and there will obviously be time for questions. So what is this bill? We've already been talking about it. Both Dan and Peggy mentioned some of the impact of this, but this is the bill. You've maybe heard it called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, maybe called OBA or HR1. It now has a public law number. The reconciliation bill is something else that people were calling it, or you might have seen that in the news. Reconciliation was the procedural way that Republicans were able to pass this without any Democratic votes. And that's what happened. There were no Democrats who voted for this bill, but unfortunately it was signed into law on July 4th. And as Dan and Peggy have already mentioned, this will be the largest transfer of wealth from working class Americans to the ultra wealthy in history. Basically, this bill makes the rich richer, the poor poorer, and leaves the middle class behind. Some of the impacts of this bill, in order to try to offset the cost of some of the cost, I should say, of these huge tax breaks for the rich, there have been huge cuts for Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act, and food assistance, again, as has been mentioned. So there's cuts of $1 trillion to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act, which is going to mean 13 million people losing their health insurance and increased healthcare costs for everyone. Taking those SNAP cuts, the food assistance cuts, is going to take away food assistance from 22 million families. And now, again, some of these cuts are done in a way that they are shifting the cost to states, and then it's either up to the states to pick up the tab or make more cuts. It is like eliminating some clean energy credits that's going to raise everyone's utility bills. And the two topics that I'm going to talk about a little bit more this evening are that it's going to create a permanent private school voucher scheme that's going to redirect billions of dollars a year into private schools. And it's going to raise the cost of college while at the same time making it easier for predatory colleges to defraud students. It's going to take away federal loans for many graduate students. It is really going to harm our higher education and higher education students all over the country. So I'm going to start by talking about the private school voucher scheme, which in this bill is referred to as a scholarship tax credit. So there is a section of the bill, and I believe this PowerPoint is going to get sent out. So I've hyperlinked the text to the bill if you want to really dive in, giving you the section number here. But it creates what the bill calls a tax credit for contributions of individuals to scholarship granting organizations. And I'm going to unpack that in a second. But this is the first national private school voucher program that we've ever had. And it is structured as a 100% tax credit. And just a quick refresher, since we're not just around April 15th, people may have forgotten, but the way it works is a tax deduction reduces your taxable income. For people, for example, who itemize their deductions, if you make a contribution to a food bank, to a homeless shelter, to your place of worship, all of those you can deduct. So you get to lower your taxable income. But a credit actually deducts the amount of taxes you are owed. So this means that a credit is worth about 3 times more than a deduction. So just keep that in mind. And it just means it's very unusual and highly generous tax benefit. And what does this voucher tax credit do? So it is included, as I said, a new 100% dollar for dollar tax credit for people who contribute money to a voucher giving organization. In the bill, it's called a scholarship granting organization, or an SGO. And so for every dollar someone contributes, they get $1 back from the federal government. So I have a hard time calling it a donation, because you're not really out anything. So I just call it a contribution. And it effectively makes individual taxpayers like the straw man for the federal government to hand federal dollars to these to pay for private school vouchers. So what are the details that are in the bill? Any taxpayer in the country can claim a federal tax credit of up to $1,700 per year by contributing to an approved scholarship granting organization. And as I just mentioned, this means that that taxpayer will get all of their money back from the federal government. If they donate $1,700, the federal government is going to say you owe $1,700 less in taxes. Those go, as I said, to the SGO, the Scholarship Granting Organization, or the voucher nonprofit. The SGO uses those funds to distribute scholarships, that's the term they use in the bill, to K-12 students. So that's really the structure. Now, in this bill, and Illinois until recently had a small tuition tax credit program, so you all may be familiar with this. Now, there's some additional rules in this bill that Republicans didn't really want to put in, but in order for them to use this procedural shortcut to not need any Democratic votes, they had to make some of these changes. So one of them is that for an SGO to participate in this program, the state has to include them in the list of approved scholarship granting organizations. So there's going to be a big role for states in this. There are minimal restrictions on which students can receive the voucher. And just to be very clear, the group of people who can contribute to an SGO and claim the federal credit is not the same group of people who are going to get the vouchers. Those could be the same people, but they could be completely different people. So the students who can receive the vouchers, the restriction is that they are from families earning less than 300% of the area median income. That is about 90% of all students qualify based on income, and must attend school in the state of their approved SGO. So what can these scholarships be used for? So it can be used for any qualified education expense for any qualified student. And the definition of any qualified education expense references an existing definition in law, which is for the Coverdell accounts. And that does explicitly include public school students. And it is things like technology, so laptops, tablets. It includes transportation. It includes support for students with disabilities. It does also include tuition, fees, uniforms, transportation, things that public schools do not charge for. And the IRS is going to be issuing rules about how to implement this provision. And after that, we know that states are going to, on an annual basis, states will be opting in to the program or not. And if they opt in, under what conditions? And so like I said, there's going to be lots of future opportunity for more engagement. I will say we've already seen some of that in the states, and Peggy knows that better than I do. But I will say that I think what the IRS puts out is going to could make a big difference. How much flexibility they give states or not to make their own decisions, how heavy-handed they're going to be about, can states come up with different criteria? So this is going to be an ongoing issue, and we don't really sorry, let me say that it starts January 1st of 2027 is when people can start making their contributions. And that is the date when states are supposed to provide to the US Treasury Secretary who are their approved SGOs for that coming year. I don't think that Treasury is going to put out their rules until maybe the spring. So there's going to be a lot of action happening last year. And Dan, did you have a question?
No, I accidentally hit raise my hand. Sorry.
Okay.
But very observant of you.
And then, just the estimated cost, it's because it's so unique, it is a bit difficult to estimate how much is this going to cost the federal government. And we do expect that over time, this is a permanent tax credit. So unless and until Congress actively repeals it, it's part of the tax code. But we have seen estimates. Again, I have the link in the PowerPoint from some of our friends at ITEP, that this tax credit could cost $8 to $51 billion per year. And to put that in context, $51 billion is well more than the federal government spends on public K-12 education every year.
That's incredible. I saw that in your notes, and that is mind-blowing, right? That they've set up a tax giveaway. As you point out, it's not a deduction. This is a check essentially from the federal government to you for your taxes. That accounts potentially for more money than the federal government spends on K-12 education. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, the federal government, I'd say now spends in the mid, like 30 to $40 billion per year, total on all K-12. And so we are really talking about dwarfing that. And we know that our public schools could use additional resources. So, if this money is on hand, there's a much better use for it. And finally, I'm including a link to the National Coalition for Public Education, which AFT is a proud member of and an active participant in. There are a lot of great resources there about why vouchers are bad, the different types of vouchers, what the studies show about them contributing to actually poorer academic achievement, how they don't serve students with disabilities, how they discriminate against students, a whole host of reasons to oppose private school vouchers in all their forms.
And can I just jump in here on one other thing, Sarah, because you mentioned this, that it is true. In Illinois, we had something very cynically named Invest in Kids, and it was a relatively small voucher program, but it was the same design. SGOs, someone could give, a wealthy person most likely would give a contribution, and they'd get in Illinois, it was a 75% tax credit on their for that donation. And it was outrageous, and it was designed to sunset, and it was very hard, but we fought for it at the state legislature, and we got it, so it was not renewed. So it's dead. It's the first voucher program in any state in the union that was actually finally extinguished. So we're very concerned here. One, we're familiar with this design, but two, we're very concerned because this is federal, right? So imagine all those state legislators, including Democrats, who sort of liked Invest in Kids because, let's help the poor kids, even though that's not what's happening. And then they look at this and they say, well, this doesn't cost the state a dime, right? So how can we turn this down? So we've had some initial conversations with the leader of our House and Senate, and they're good Democrats, and they have no interest in creating a method by which this could be accessed by Illinois. But I'm not so sure. We'll see. And it's going to be something we've all got to really work hard on. So more to come on that. But thanks for this part. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And so that's the K-12 education piece. I mean, I should say the changes to SNAP and Medicaid are also going to have huge impacts on K-12 education. Medicaid is, I believe, the fourth largest federal source of funding for K-12 schools. So any cutbacks there, we know how important meals are for kids to be able to learn and focus in school and succeed. And so there will be a lot more ripple effects. In addition, of course, to the cost shift and what that does to state budgets, as Peggy was talking about, when they then have to decide Are we funding K-12? Are we funding higher ed? How are we doing that? And so again, that brings me to higher education. And the bill here guts $300 billion from higher education. This is not, this K-12 federal, voucher tax credit, whereas Dan mentioned, maybe there's an argument you're not directly pulling it away. Well, here it's directly being taken away. For example, it eliminates the most affordable income-driven repayment plan, resulting in the typical college graduate paying almost $3,000 more per year in student loan repayments. We are concerned about the impact on programs that prepare essential careers, things like early childhood workers who don't earn a lot of money, given a new provision that requires certain earnings of program graduates to continue. It eliminates Graduate Plus loans, which nationally there's 425,000 students who use those. That could push these graduate students into risky private loans that don't have the same protections as federal loans and that don't qualify for public service loan forgiveness. I already mentioned it strips relief from students who were scammed by for-profit colleges. It raids $761 million from university endowments as part of this war on higher education that we are seeing play out across the country through this administration. And as I just mentioned, this cost shift to states, we know that higher education often bears a lot of the brunt when state budgets get squeezed. So just to go through some of those provisions again in two sort of buckets. One bucket of big changes in higher education is what it does on the eligibility of programs at colleges and universities to get their students access to federal financial aid. And then what it does to hold those institutions accountable for being good stewards of federal money and not swindling students, basically. And unfortunately, we have concerns in the bill. So one thing it does is it creates a new accountability program. I mentioned this at the last slide, that creates certain earnings thresholds. So graduates of certain programs have to earn a certain amount in order for that program to maintain access to federal loans for their current students. And it sets thresholds basically that under non-graduate programs like a bachelor's degree and associate's degree, their graduates need to earn more than high school grads in the state. And for graduate degree level programs, those graduates have to earn more than people working in a similar field without a graduate degree. Now, in some cases, this might make sense. If there are really poor colleges or predatory colleges that just jack up their costs and they're not sending their students to good, equipping them to work, that might be a good thing. But this is a huge change for higher education. It was not modeled in a public way. There were no hearings on it in Congress. We also are concerned about shoehorning all of higher education into a job training model. We know that many people go to college to be able to get a career or a job, but there are other benefits to higher education as well. And so, like I said, we are concerned in part because so much of this is unknown yet. And we do ask that if folks are, work in higher education, as you see what's happening at your institutions, please do share that information with us. But like I said, I'm concerned about something like early childhood education, where we know is critically important for our communities and the country and those students, the little kids who go to those programs and their parents to be able to work, but that are, notoriously low paid. So what is that going to mean for something like this? The bill also creates a new workforce Pell program, which will allow students to use Pell grants for very short-term programs, 8 to 15 weeks, We know that a lot of community colleges have been offering these types of programs to help people reskill, upskill, or just get some training that doesn't need a full degree. And so that's the positive. We are concerned that there's not sufficient guardrails, though, to keep out the predatory actors who are then going to come in, spend a lot of money advertising, and sort of pull students away from those quality programs at community colleges to go to higher cost, lower quality programs instead. And it delays for 10 years the Biden era borrower defense rule and the Biden era closed school discharge. It actually reinstates Betsy DeVos rules, including the Betsy DeVos borrower defense rule. This is, some of you may recall, about a decade ago when ITT Tech collapsed and Corinthian colleges, and it just turned out there was so much widespread fraud and abuse in that school. And students were being deceived about why they were enrolling. And so that started this whole process with, it's called the borrower defense to repayment, to say, like in other areas of consumer protection law, if you were scammed about the product that you took out a loan to get, that loan is null and void. Well, Betsy DeVos's rule for it was so stingy and mean-spirited that her own Department of Education estimated that only 3% of students who were misled would have their loans forgiven, and that you had to show you earned negative income in the year to show you were harmed enough to get the relief that was in the law. Actually, 10 Republican senators agreed that it was a terrible rule, and Trump used his first and possibly only veto of his first term to keep that rule in place when Congress in a bipartisan way tried to repeal it. Well, this big ugly bill puts that Betsy DeVos rule back in place for 10 years, unfortunately. And then again, I think I'm going a bit long, so I'll just go through this quickly. But student aid and loan repayment, as I mentioned, it really is, it's eliminating the old income-driven repayments, which are the type of student loan repayments where your annual monthly payment changes based on how much you've earned, so that as you earn more, you pay back more. And it changes the standard repayment. Standards are a fixed amount of time, and then every month for that entire fixed amount of time, 10 years usually in the old ones, you pay the same amount. So what this bill does is it ends the old income-driven repayment plans and creates a new one. And it also sort of ends the old standard repayment plan and creates a new one that will spread out the time for people with higher balance loans. It also ends the PLUS loans, as I mentioned, and subsidized Stafford loans for graduate and professional students, and creates new caps on the maximum amount that undergrad, graduate, professional students and parents can borrow for their education. So there is going to be a lot of changes here. A lot of those changes to the loan caps start next school year. So we, again, really ask people to keep us informed of how is it that the institutions are responding to this. Are they able to lower prices? Are they increasing grant aid? Or what we are concerned about is that they're going to instead push people to private student loans that, like I said, don't offer some of the same protections as the federal loans and don't allow people to qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So here, again, I'm going to include links because especially on the higher ed part, it can get a bit weedy. So I do want to flag that our AFT votes page, we have a higher education page, and it does include, if you scroll down, a state fact sheet that will talk about in Illinois, how many graduate students use Graduate Plus loans that are being harmed, for example. So it goes through a lot of those data points I used, and where we have some state numbers, highlights those state numbers. Please use them to help educate your friends and neighbors and coworkers. And if you want to do any lobby visits or any of this activism, we hope that's a good, useful resource for you. I've also included this Student Borrower Protection Center. They're a great partner of ours. I've included a blog post that includes some handy charts about the student loan changes that are happening. What was the old limit? What's the new limit? When does it take effect? And then the Department of Education has to issue rules to implement all of these provisions. And they're in the They started that process. I've put the link to all of it's called the negotiated rulemaking process, where first they gather sort of people with a stake in the process who are supposed to represent a constituency. They'll have several meetings. They'll see if they can come to agreement on what the law, means and how it should be implemented. And then they will publish a proposed rule about here's what we think, and then there will be a public comment period, and then they have the final rule, and those final rules have the force of law. So if you're interested in diving deeper, that link is there, and then the link to the underlying bill. So I was also asked to say, what's next on the federal landscape? Well, we just talked about reconciliation. The implementation and impact is going to be really important. We talked about vouchers and, the state role there, higher education, this negotiated rulemaking, and what is it institutions are going to do as they think about the student aid. And then with Congress, there's a funding fight coming up. The federal fiscal year ends September 30th. So what's going to happen? We know President Trump has proposed huge cuts. We know in the Senate, there's bipartisan effort that has rejected those cuts. And in the House, they are moving some of the bills with some of the cuts, but not all of the cuts. So that is a place where, and a lot of the K-12 funding, is there through the annual appropriations fight. That's an opportunity to get engaged and active. There are some rumors that the Republicans are going to try another reconciliation bill to get the things in they weren't able to do this time that they wanted to. And of course, for us, accountability for the big ugly bill. We need to, as Peggy said, make sure people understand who did this, and that the bad impact is what can we do about it? How can we hold elected officials accountable? And I've included the AFT link where you can find more information across issue areas about the reconciliation bill, or the big ugly bill. And finally, Dan mentioned that this link was going to be up. So here is the email address Dan was talking about. So you can see it, info@ift-aft.org, to share your story about how cuts are impacting you. And since we're just a couple days out from Labor Day, a link to find some Labor Day events near you.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much for all that information. And we know we've got already about 10 big Labor Day events happening around Illinois, including in Chicago, but all the way down south and everywhere else. There's more than that are smaller, and a lot of our locals are attached to those and participating. So that's a good thing to know. I just want to say too that, again, if you have a question, if you're on this call, and you have a question about any of this, you can put it in the Q&A at the bottom. If you look at the bottom banner, ruler, whatever it's called, at the bottom of your screen on Zoom, there's a Q&A button, and you can click on that and type in your question, and we'll try to get to it in a little bit. So thanks. That's all really depressing and sort of mind-blowing, but it's good to know. And let me turn to Dr. Brian Johnson, our great director of political activities here in the IFT. Live from Springfield, Illinois.
Hi from Springfield. Hi, everybody. How we doing? Thanks, Dan. Can you guys hear me okay? I hope everything's okay.
Loud and clear.
Good deal. So appreciate Sarah. I appreciate Peggy for jumping on today and kind of laying out the national picture for sure. I'm coming on just to really kind of connect the dots of why this moment is kind of so urgent. And our brother, my brother, and your brother too, Kurt Hilgendorf, was supposed to be on tonight, but they're having a meeting with the Chicago Board of Education tonight on a very important matter of getting their budget passed. So he couldn't be on tonight, but he gave me a couple things to say, and I'm going to sprinkle those into my comments. So, here's really the truth of what's really going on, and I think that everything that Sarah said and everything that Peggy said, all of these things from the federal level, in addition to what's happening to us on the state level and how we've not been able to really change our tax code to make it work for us. It's all going to impact our state budget all at once. All right. Chicago, you've seen them feeling that state and federal squeeze right now. Like, they're going through it, and they're really like a beacon for what happens when schools are underfunded. there aren't good options when schools are underfunded, right? Forces cuts. We're talking about cuts to crossing guards, janitors, teachers, special education assistants. CPS is already 1.6 billion short in the evidence-based funding formula from the state, and they're not alone in that, right? Elgin, Rockford, two very big districts that are also shorted from the state. So, CPS itself, 73% underfunded. We also know that Peoria, Champaign-Urbana, Belleville, districts in the South Burbs, where my kids attend, District 186 in Springfield, Decatur, all of these districts are similarly underfunded at the same level as Chicago. So it's not just Chicago, right? Many of these districts are in the same boat when it comes to state K through 12 funding, and the fix has to be sustainable revenue. So I'm going to expand out here because over the next 6 to 12 to 24 months, and beyond, many of these other communities and districts are going to start to feel the same impacts that Chicago is feeling right now. So, whether you're a large urban district, whether you're a mid-sized district, a rural community, this big ugly bill is going to hit you, right? Means reduced resources from the federal government on it for education, for healthcare for your community, nutrition's being cut, dollars to districts and local governments that they count on to balance their budgets will not be there, right? And it's going to be an increased cost for all of us because as the federal government pulls back, state and local taxpayers, we're going to have to pick up that tab, right? If we want to continue to offer the same services that we do, and districts are going to be forced already. They're going to be they're going to be stretched very thin. Cover things like special education, transportation, school meals, healthcare for children. It's going to mean deeper inequities, right? The communities that rely on the federal and state support the most are low-income districts, rural districts, communities of color. They're going to be hit the hardest, right? It's going to be wide. It's going to really widen the gap of the haves and the have-nots. We also know that this won't stop at K through 12 schools, right? Sarah outlined what's happening at higher ed. Higher ed requires more investment. It did before this administration took power, and it absolutely does now, seeing as this administration is really fixated on destroying everything higher education. Healthcare is at risk. So, a lot is hanging in the balance if Illinois does not find a way to meet its obligations to fund the things that it needs to fund. So, in the coming months, you can expect to hear a lot more from IFT about revenue and why it's needed. We really want you guys to understand why we're having this conversation, and we're likely going to launch a campaign in support of it. And it's because of these tax cuts that Peggy and Sarah outlined, right? It's because of the big ugly bill that's going to force states to really make impossible choices, and false choices for that matter. We've always been on a shaky foundation when it comes to collecting revenue, and it's going to take sustainable revenue to fund the things that we need to fund, and we need to make the folks that can pay more do that, right? We need to make these millionaires and these billionaires pay more because, if we don't do that, we're not going to be able to fund the things that we need to fund. So just coming on to say that you're going to start hearing from us about revenue, and we will likely start a campaign down the road on this. And it's going to be connected to what you heard tonight, right? To fund some of the things that you've heard about tonight, and to keep Illinois from really falling farther behind. We really have to do something to protect the communities that we work in, that we teach in, and that we live in. So quick preview. Next one of these might be about revenue. Just giving you a quick preview of what's to come. And just know that we're going to be reaching out to you, and we're prepared to act because we need to, and we're going to be asking you to act with us down the road. Okay, that's all I got to say, Dan. I'm gonna kick it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Brian. That was dead on. And I mean, you and I have already seen this in really almost not just this year's budget and legislative session in Springfield, but even last year when questions about the budget were harder for even Democrats to vote on, right? And I remember our good friend Ralph Martiri at the Center for Tax and Budget Accountability would sometimes say, even a bad tax is preferable to cuts in services. And I'm not talking about, adding bad taxes, but what that points out is cuts in services are really detrimental to the public, right? And that's what people are looking at now because of what's rolling down from the feds here. So 100%, we got to re-engage as an IFT, as all of you IFT activists, on revenue. And you know what? That is a long-standing historical position of the IFT. It goes way back to us saying we need more money for schools, we need more money for public services, we need more money for all the things the state has to do, including K through 20 education, so pre-K through 20 education. So we got to re-engage, and we need all of you. So let's go to, we do have a couple of questions, and I just want to get to one because I don't know if if people put it in the Q&A, if everyone sees it. So my pal Linda Wilson from Peoria. Linda, it's great that you asked a question. I haven't seen you in so long. I hope you're doing well. But Linda's question was, will there be additional provisions for the public service for loan forgiveness program? And Sarah, do you want to just talk that answer through for us?
Yeah. So the big ugly bill did not touch the public service loan forgiveness program. And I think that is a testament to how important the program is, and how over the past 5 to 10 years, everyone has made it known to Congress how important it is. So the bill didn't touch the program itself. It did clarify that the new income-driven repayment plan will be eligible. People on those new plans will be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So good news is the PSLF program wasn't touched. Now we know that people's ability to afford continuing to make their student loan payments will have some impact, because you have to be making your payments in order to qualify for PSLF. The bill, the new repayment gets rid of the $0 repayments for people who are at the lowest income bracket. And so I think PSLF survived pretty well, considering all the other changes that were made. Now, there is a separate effort by the Trump administration to use PSLF as a weapon against nonprofits and school districts and states that it doesn't agree with, who are taking policy positions it doesn't agree with, such as on immigration. And that process is ongoing. But I do, and so maybe you've heard something about that, and we're certainly fighting that. But I do want to be clear that that is, based on a Trump executive order, that is not what came out of Congress. That's not in law. And in fact, we think the executive order and the rules that they're trying to do based on the executive order are illegal, because it contradicts what's in the law. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you, Linda, for that question. I hope to see you in Peoria. I'll be down in Peoria in a couple of weeks. We have another question from Elaine Barlos, who Elaine is a IFT first vice president for our retirees group. And Elaine asks, how do we, and this is a great question to kind of wrap up with, Elaine. Elaine said, how do we get buy-in from communities to protect public education and continue funding for it? It seems that the people who support this federal administration agree that public education doesn't deserve funding. How can we show the devastating effects of these cuts to everyone in our society? And so thanks, Elaine, for that question. It's like spot on, right? It's really essentially why we're here, because we're talking about how do we get active to push back on the effects of this bill and other things they want to do in a way that frames the positives for public education that people do believe in. Randy talks about this a lot. Gallup polls, it's a lot like Congress. People will say, oh yeah, public education is broken, but we love our school. My kid's school's great. We love our teachers, right? And that's the thing. So one of the ways we respond to that is a vigorous defense of public education. We've said for a while, we did well here in Illinois to like hammer back and knock down invest in kids. But the defense of public education can't just be playing whack-a-mole with trying to kill the bad stuff that pops up. It's got to be a vigorous exploration, a kind of reconnection of the American citizenry to the values of public education and what it provides to our nation. And so how do we do that? And that's where we get to the stories. We need you to talk about and show us, so we can again display these around the state publicly, spread these stories to legislators, all the great things that happen in your classrooms and your universities and colleges every day. so one way to do that is really just literally share that story. And so there's an email address I'm going to give you that will go to our comms department at the IFT. And if you say, hey, look, there's a really great, early child, Linda Wilson says, my God, the early childhood program in Peoria has got to be seen to be believed. It works magic, right? Then we're going to follow up with Linda and see how do we spread the gospel, the good word of that program. Or in Peoria, I mean, I know one thing that Peoria does really well is CTE. It's been a hallmark program for a long time. That's really critical. So how do you do that? The address is info, the email address to email us, like, I got a great story, info@ift-aft.org. That's info, info at ift-aft.org. Brian?
Yeah, I just want to lift that. I just want to like and what you just said. So at convention, we're actually going to be doing something around this, like talking about telling our stories. I think my department and the comms department is going to be working together to do a presentation and a breakout session on it because nobody's going to tell our stories. Like we have to get out there and use the tools that we have to tell them. It's really hard. I feel like it's hard to get to break through in this media environment, right? So we're gonna work with the membership on that at convention a little bit. And then the second thing is I forgot to mention one really important thing. John Miller actually pinged me on it, but we're the equity funding bill for higher education. I should have flagged that in my comments. I did not, but I wanted to lift that up.
That's great. That's an important. If those of you in K-12 know, we talk a lot about the EBF funding, evidence-based, funding model. It's been revolutionary for K-12, and there's been a similar effort to do something sort of like that in the higher ed sphere. That would mean a heck of a lot more money invested in higher education in the state of Illinois, and we need to pass that. But again, that speaks to this roll down effect where at the state level, legislators are like, gee, I don't know, what can we afford? Because look what's happening at the federal level. And so we've got to redo revenue. Even if you set aside everything the Trump administration is doing or threatening to do, we still in Illinois have a structural deficit. We still have to revolutionize or change for the better our funding, our revenue system in Illinois, not just for schools, but for everything. And it hasn't been done. We've got an antiquated system that relies way too much on taxing goods and services, on regressive taxation and things like that. And so we need to change that. And that's join us in that effort. Like Brian said at the beginning, we're going to have another one of these webinars on revenue, and you're going to see a lot more about revenue. So I want to, before we go, I want to say the other thing too, you can all, like we say this every time Brian and I were talking about this, you can go to your US Congress people, like that bill is passed, but as Sarah told you, there's potential for other reconciliation. There's the continuing resolution that funds the government that's going to expire in September. There's all sorts of opportunities to go and talk to your Congress folks, some of whom really want your vote for higher office or reelection. And it's important for you to show your face in their offices or call them, get on the phone, send them emails, whatever, and say, hey, look, we are union members. We're teachers, we're professors, we're public employees, whoever we are in your districts, your constituents, and what you're doing is unacceptable. What are you going to do about funding, restoring what was the amount? $51 billion cut from federal education in this bill, such like that. And then we have Labor Day coming up, right? And we have the Labor Day. You can go to Mobilize, the AFT's Mobilize page. If you go to aft.org, you'll see the link to the Mobilize page where you can kind of register and find out where there's something going on for Labor Day near you, and that you can sign up to do that. So, and then the last thing I'll say before I get to Brian, and we're going to wrap it up. When I went to summer camp, I went to a YMCA summer camp, and at the end, it was Camp Mongo Tassi in Hale, Michigan. And at the end, they said, you did the most important thing any camper can do for Camp Mongo Tassi. You brought other campers. I always found that very amusing. But that's the very thing that you can do as an activist is get more activists, is get your colleagues, every one of us. I 17 years teaching English every day at Niles North High School. You see colleagues all the day, and you all day long at the end of the day at lunch or whatever, you can grab them and say, hey, look, you know what? You know what they're doing to education and what the funding is going to mean for us in our district? like, here, send an email, sign up, or, I'm going to the Labor Day protest. Can you come with me? Things like that. Or just make sure they know what's happening. That's half the battle. So get your colleagues, get ready for Labor Day, reach out to your Congress people, and stay tuned with your union on all this news and what's happening as we move forward. Mr. Johnson.
Real quick, before we jump, I just want to mention that we're going to carry that funding message into our Labor Day. So when you're at your Labor Day events and you're talking to folks and you're shoulder to shoulder with them, celebrating Labor Day and pushing back on Trump, talk about the funding piece of this and really start to gin up that conversation or in those spaces because it's going to take, it always takes a while to build this in Illinois. So we got to start building it around the state. And then finally, like you all should be getting a link after this post session where you can download some signs, but we'll send that to you. No worries. Dan, you want to close us out?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's it. And I really just want to extend my thanks to everybody who got on, all you activists, and also the great Peggy Shorey and Sarah Cohen from the AFT. One of the great things we have about our national union is all these tremendously smart, hardworking folks that follow this stuff for us, lobby in Congress, but also keep us informed. So we really appreciate the both of you coming on here for us in Illinois. And thanks to all of you activists for getting on, giving us an hour on a Thursday evening at the end of summer. So we will see you out on the streets in Labor Day, and I look forward to more of these webinars. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye-bye.